that everybody is in, and I'm going to start as I normally would. So interactions are very important to get the flow, and so please do keep the contributions coming. Questions as well through the chat. Might even have some sort of ongoing dialogue. Usually I like to have personal introductions. I find it very hard not to have everybody's feedback so that I can check on your eyes and see whether what I'm saying is getting through and is making sense. So this is then first thing out of the way. Keep contributions coming. So if everybody that listened to this will just say, yes, I listened to this in the chat. You know, you get your fingers active, and then you know maybe we get a nice flow. That's nice, cool. Hello everybody, hello. So it's 9:15, and we're here all together in my bedroom, and probably in your bedroom as well. Thank you for welcoming me to your home. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start Keynote potentially, and this is have to allow Zoom to share the screen, and oh no, it tells me that I have to quit Zoom in order to be able to share the screen with Keynote. So give me a moment. I'll be just a moment later. Is there another way to do this? Share screen, entire screen, desktop one. Yeah, let's do this. And then I guess that right this. Woo! Now, welcome you all. So to primary neural networks. Let's see. I still am setting up, so I would like the group chat to be in the presenting list. It's not possible. Okay. You know what I'm going to do? I heard once that some people don't like it when when you can see the slides together with just a second. We're going to be with you again in a second. Howdy. Okay. Yeah, I guess that I cannot maintain the whole full screen at the same time as the chat, so that is a little bit of a letdown. What I'm going to do instead is to be flipping the slides, and from time to time I'm going to go and check the chat. So please do continue keeping your messages coming as we just agreed.
Legend ever.
And I'll share the entire screen so we can have this like this. 9:15, and everything is calm. Oh, there was an animation here. No longer coming. I wanted to introduce myself first. I'm gonna do it anyways, even though we're losing a little bit of time. So, Mario Negrello, terrible at configuring online meetings, but I have had some other interesting experiences before I came here. I am Brazilian, and I had my PhD in evolutionary robotics and dynamical systems, working with recurrent neural networks to control some robots. I then transitioned to computational neuroscience to try to analyze real data. Here you see spike analysis. This is the stuff that I do in the neuroscience department alongside with computational modeling. with some of the students, in fact, are participating today. We study the anatomy and dynamics of the cerebellum. Also, this like really closely related to what we do in the neuroscience department. And this is a little pitch. So I've written a book about these topics like that we're going to be discussing today, like really connected to how neural networks bring behavior about. And so that is my personal focus, continues to be in my studies. Let's have an outlook before we start about what the whole lecture is going to, or the whole program, the whole course is going to look like. So in lecture 1, we will discuss computational neuroscience and neural computation. So these are two duals, and I like to make a distinction between them. That is an epistemological distinction. It's a distinction on the basis of what their goals are and what their emphasis are. And this helps clarify the mind for what's coming afterwards. So we're going to be, as many of you, the SurveyMonkey, and we're going to be discussing the SurveyMonkey results in a moment. Already noticed and preferred is that we see at the same time biological networks and artificial networks presented side by side. Like it's like you pointed out, many of you, that it's the interfaces between biological neural networks and the artificial neural networks where we can learn the most. So lecture 1 is going to focus a little bit on that. The second part of lecture 1, however, is going to be on the first computational neuroscience model, the Hodgkin-Huxley model. So you're going to have projects. In all of the course, there will be some projects for us to go through. I'll talk about them in a moment. In lecture 2, we're going to be looking into reduced models of neurons and integrate and fire neural networks. In lecture 3, we're going to be looking into structure-function relationships. So neural networks are not just jumbled up bundles of neurons. They actually have very particular anatomy. And in fact, more and more computational scientists and artificial intelligence people are looking into the brain to find out what parts of anatomy relate to certain functions. And we're going to discuss certain motifs in structural underpinnings of these networks and how they translate into embodied behavioral function. Structurally, like without change. So in lecture 3, we're not going to be looking into networks that change. They're not learning yet. We're just going to be saying that certain structures directly relate to certain cognitive functions even before you apply some learning. In lecture 4, we're going to be looking a little bit into what happens when the synapses start to change, and plasticity, unsupervised at first, just when there's activity in the network and the neurons are firing in different ways and they're wiring. You might have heard about the Hebbian principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So many plasticities, like there's not only Hebbian plasticity, but the idea is that it's an unsupervised mechanism. It is something that happens in the nature of the network, and self-organization then emerges. We're going to be talking about plasticity and unsupervised learning in the context of self-organization. And in lecture 5, finally, we're going to focus a little bit more into supervised learning and patterns. But this is the basis of machine learning, deep neural networks that we currently see in the revival of artificial intelligence. But I'm going to also give a flavor of brain science in here. We're going to talk about receptive fields. We're going to talk about multidimensional encoding in populations, also with spiking neurons in the back of our minds. So here we're trying to assemble a constructivistic understanding in this primary neural networks of how did the networks come together to produce behavioral function, given what we know is there. And then for a test this year, we're going to have project presentations. And there are going to be projects with 1 or 2 people inside these projects, and you can have a programming component, but it can also simply be a presentation plus a report. So it's either a presentation and a report, or code and a presentation. So in both cases, presentation. But you know, it depends on how keen you feel to actually get your fingers dirty programming. We don't have a lot of time to focus on the machineries of programming these neural networks, and I wanted to just allow people that don't want to focus on coding and just want to focus on the conceptual level to do that. So you can simply go for the presentation. I have here the group chat, and you're probably still listening, I hope. This lecture is also being recorded, and you can listen to this again. And I just wanted to know if you have questions about the structure of the course. Plug them in, and I'll address them later, okay? So if you have questions about the structure of the course, put it in the group chat, and I'll address them either in Brightspace later or as we get the chance. We continue. So the lecture structure, each lecture has a certain lecture structure. So we, in general, so with the exception of the first lecture, which has an introduction to start with, it's going to be about 14 minutes introduction as I had planned. We start at 9:15, so it's going to run until 10. So this is introduction today. But in most days, starting at 8:45, we're going to have 40 minutes of a little review of the previous lecture and maybe a part of the project, plus a little quiz to make sure that you know we are on top of the material that had just been presented. There is a strict continuity in the material between the different lectures, at least as they're currently conceived. Then we're going to have the lecture proper. I'm going to try to make it concise and short, so that we give space for a discussion of certain student questions that might arise as we have a chat. So I'm trying to make this compatible with the system we have with video lectures. So the idea then is you plug in questions, whatever comes to your mind as you're listening to me during this lecture part, and I then address them in detail a little bit later. I think that this is good and interactive. I hope that this is going to enrich the conceptual structure of the lecture. Then we're going to have an introduction to a particular project. So every lecture has a little project inside, and it's code that you're going to go through. Most of it already pre-written. You just have to add some stuff and edit some stuff, and the answers are going to be there. But in any case, I'm going to be giving you an introduction to the project, go through the main learning goals and prerequisites, also taking questions, of course. Then, after the project introduction, we're going to have project work with support via a discussion platform. In this case, we're talking about Discord as a discussion platform. I'm going to send you a link. If you've taken computational science this year, you will notice that this is how it worked there as well. So we have about 100 people studying computational science, and there is a couple of introductions how to do that, but it's basically a set of group chats with different rooms. And then people can work in groups or by themselves. And then there is a main chat dialogue where you can pose questions. It's called Raise Your Hand. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to also show you what the platform looks like today, introduce it. And then during the remainder of the lecture, I'm going to be online with you texting answers to the questions that may arise during the project work. So the idea is that you go through the project work and certain things will not be clear. As you're building up knowledge, certain assumptions might not be evident to you. And the purpose for the discussion is both to help you debug your own solutions, but also to make me know what do you think that you need most help with. And then I might add a couple of little video snippets explaining certain components of the project. That I deliver then the content that you think you need the most. I mean, like I'll choose some content ahead of time to introduce you to the topic, but then we'll try to focus on what is most important to you. So this is then the structure of each individual lecture of these 5 coming lectures. And then finally, we're talking about what's going to happen today. So lectures every day, and then today. Today, first this. So it was the interpersonal introductions. We didn't have an introduction. We introduced yours truly. And then here we have I wanted to discuss with you a little bit the feedback from your SurveyMonkey results, so the knowledge probe. Then I want to introduce you to the mind map of the computing brain. You will notice that this slide was edited from my minor that I applied at EMC. Some of you may even have heard about it. It's going to run from September to November. I also present the same mind map there. So the primary neural networks is a smaller version of the computing brain, which actually involves a lot more neuroscience as well, and goes into more detail into many of these topics. But it's a mind map of the computing brain, our computing brain. So how do we go about doing science about it? So this happens just after our knowledge probe. Then we're going to discuss modeling a little bit. You are nanobiologists, so many of you already have a pretty good sense of what a model is and what a model is for. And here I'm going to just activate that knowledge, activate the critical thinking that brings you to think, oh, this model is too simple, this model is too complex, this model doesn't explain, this model cannot predict. So the idea here is that we have a clear mind about what models can accomplish and why is it that they're so powerful, particularly in computational neuroscience, as we're talking about cognitive function. And then here I want to then have a set of slides that fly by really in the differences between computational neuroscience and neural computation as I see them. And then we're going to have a model of a biophysical model of the action potential. I use it particularly because I know that many of you already have quite a bit of previous knowledge on the dynamics of the membrane potential. So you have definitely studied the equilibrium potential, of the Nernst potential in nanobiology and biophysics. So we're going to go a little bit more into detail of the Hodgkin-Huxley model, which is the first model of computational neuroscience, the first model of the action potential that takes into account the biophysical implementation of the model, the real certain realities of the cell. First model proper of the neuron was actually an integrate and fire model by Lapicque in 1907. So that is 113 years ago. But we're going to talk about the model that is about 68 years old now, 1952 by Hodgkin and Huxley. And this is the one that you're going to go through in the project. So first things first, let's talk a little bit about the feedback of the SurveyMonkey results. This has been now 15 minutes. It would have been an hour, 45 minutes since the original start of the lecture. So my plan is to, until the break, we're going to have a little break here, is to cover the knowledge probe, the mind map, and what is a good model. So we're going to do these 3 things first. And then we're going to go into this flyby on the differences of computational neuroscience, neurocomputation. So essentially, we're going to have a break after what is a good model. And then we'll continue flyby computational neuroscience and neurocomputation and the biophysical model of the action potential and the project. I'll introduce that too. Okay, so I don't see my next slide. I hope that, but I don't need to, because what we're doing is we're looking into the SurveyMonkey analysis. I hope you're still seeing what this, and because I've changed screens and I just want to make sure that you're seeing the right screen. Where's the chat? It's in more for some reason. And there's a okay, doesn't matter. Okay, so allow me to introduce you to why these questions are there. I really need to know where we're all standing from. The perceptron is perhaps the first learning model of single neurons, and it is a pattern recognition thing. So the fact that you don't know about it means that you have not learned a lot about artificial intelligence this far. So you're definitely going to get to the point that you're going to understand the basics of pattern recognition via neural networks. But many of you have quite a solid background in biological neurons. So this is great. This puts you actually precisely in the mindset of the slides that I prepared today. Some of you might have heard about backpropagation. So it's 20% of you have heard about backpropagation. That's the main method of learning in neural networks. Recurrent neural networks, very little, but quite a bit of logics. So surprisingly, logics and neural networks, they are very, very, very ultra close together. In fact, you can see the whole deep learning as fuzzy neural network, fuzzy logics, interestingly enough. Phase spaces is a concept of dynamical systems, very important to understand action potentials in general. Attractors. A parameter space, I wonder if we all mean the same thing as we talk about it, but it's a very crucial component as well of what we're going to be discussing, particularly in lecture 2. Dynamical system is theoretical underpinning of our understanding of the action potential. Linear regression is the theoretical underpinning of pattern recognition, or linear classification, doesn't necessarily need to be regression. Then we have here some integrate and fire neurons, gradient descent, and linear separation. So all of these are the things we're going to cover. So the first question is about the things we're really going to be looking into in this course, with the exception of biological neurons and propositional logic. So I'm hoping that by the end of this course, we will have brought all of this histogram further down to the right. And so we have here the responses. Then for question number 2, you haven't really taken very many courses on neural networks, which really is good in the context that this course is called Primer in Neural Networks. I presume that most of you know what a primer is, but a primer is a first layer before you apply the paint you want to paint. So if you have a wall and you see the bricks, if you paint it with the final paint, you can still see the bricks. But if you apply the primer, you're ready for the paint. And so it's the first layer. So it's the first pass. Only 5 lectures on neural networks. It's not sufficient to cover even like the toes of this giant. But many of you are already like taking, so you see here Dimfna Meyer as your professor. She's already looking into Synapse. In fact, we're already thinking about working together in these concepts. There are different levels of analysis, but we are definitely looking into molecular underpinnings of plasticity as well. So it gives you a little sense of what we're going to go through when we're talking about computational neuroscience. So there's one student here that has had a computer science and a course in computational intelligence. This is going to cover mostly only what is here in lecture 5. And in fact, this person and whoever has quite a bit of knowledge in computer science or in computational intelligence will probably find that lecture 5 is too basic. And I hope to give certain other angles that will adduce to the machine learning angle. But we are definitely not a machine learning course. We are trying to understand what the brain does, not trying to reproduce brain function. I'm going to get back to that. So a lot of no's. And some people are doing physical analysis with Lika in the neuroscience department. So.
My back.
Wait. Someone came in? Sorry, I guess that someone's microphone was open. Okay. And yes, so, okay, there's a couple of questions. The section is being recorded, by the way, in Zoom. So you can watch this again afterwards. Now about your confidence. So everybody's confident in implementing a MATLAB script. So or vast majority of you. So that means that you're not going to have any big troubles implementing the things that are in the projects here. Computationally speaking, the projects should be of very low level in terms of programming skill required. So I'm happy about that. You don't have to implement a class in Python. So, but even though you don't have to implement a class in Python, there's already almost 50% of the people that already know what it means. That's good, because you're going to be using some classes in Python. And maybe for those 50% that haven't looked into this, you will be getting the opportunity to, build up knowledge. So it's about going up the steps of the ladder. So it says here, gift from Zoom, running out of time. We've removed the 40-minute time limit on your group meeting. Love it. Did you see this? This was funny, sorry. So I love it that they're removing the 40 minutes. We will have to, we appreciate this for the first time. Might give, okay, so Bongo U didn't work, obviously. And here, I'm happy about these results. So question 4, now we have 50-50, Python and MATLAB. And we've been having a lot of MATLAB in this course until now, and I've decided to transition it to Python. But the level of Python that we will have is very low. So it's going to be mostly at NumPy level, and a lot of things are going to be equal to what MATLAB has. And what it isn't equal, then you can ask us via Discord later. We'll also have some teaching assistants. They're not technically they are technically teaching assistants. So Daphne Cornelis is going to be a technical teaching assistant. But I also have 2 other students of mine that are actually taking this course. So that, and they will also participate to try to address questions. So let's see if we get a critical mass of question askers here. Just skip the code. Just give me the pancakes. So that is the slides. Fry the pancakes. I understand that. So if you want to see this course as purely, just show me things, you will probably be happy, because the amount of actual hands-on work is substantial, but fairly straightforward. You can read it through. So. But it's still the minority. So many of you said it doesn't matter. So whatever comes, you are in my field. I'm also open yourself to the new experiences. And in the end, question 5. So the course should emphasize both the simulation of biological networks and artificial neural networks, as I have already mentioned in the introduction a couple of minutes ago. We are going to emphasize both. And I will look into so these responses here. I've looked into them before, but most of them are aligned with what we're going to be looking inside anyway. So someone actually asked here, convolutions. Great. We're going to talk about convolutions in lecture 5. And so the way in which simulations of biological networks and creation of artificial ones can help us better understand how our own brains work, that's my own bread and butter. Those are the things that really have brought me to the field, and I hope to give you a sense of this. We continue to discuss it as we go through. And there's also going to be a little bit of a design and training neural networks, but not at the level that you might expect from a machine learning neural network course. That's going to really tell you about all the layers and what you should choose for particular data sets. But a lot of this information is already in Medium. So if you have or in Medium or in SeedBank and Google, there's hundreds of thousands of excellent videos in YouTube. So I'm going to give you some references, but it's not going to be a nitty and gritty, let us create a neural network architecture. Let me just discuss this and take it out of the way for a moment. So these are the Survey Monkey results. Thank you for participating under such a short notice. I saw that we got 30 responses total. So 31 respondents, so that's amazing. So really appreciate it. Okay, let us move on to a mind map of the computing brain and what is a good model. And the mind map is Okay, so I have to simple mind. I had to restart the computer earlier. Okay. Now, welcome to the mind map of the computing brain. So let me reduce the complexity a moment here, so that we can talk about these great many branches of what computing to understand the brains via neural networks actually entails. Right. So we start with the brain sciences in the middle, which is we want to understand brains in all their glorious complexity, and brains involve like a lot of different aspects. So one of them is neurobiology, which is the actual matter, the flesh. But you also have cognitive neuroscience, which is what brains actually do. So pattern recognition, memory, and so forth and so on. So in neurobiology then deals with the neuron primarily, and networks of biological neurons. Looks into the actual implementations, I said, microscopes, electrophysiology. Whereas in cognitive neuroscience, you look into these big words of cognition, the big unexplainables. Oh, fear, like what's perception, what's understanding, what's cognition, what's memory. So it really tries to find out what are the logical underpinnings, how many things can you remember at the same time? Uh, uh, these kinds of questions that relate to the psychological aspects of our brain processing are involved in cognitive neuroscience. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, also is a tool of cognitive neuroscience, where when we think about a banana, what lights up in our brain? So finding correlates of percepts and cognitive components. So these two then are the more biological components of the problem. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at each other. So we're looking at cognition. We're looking at how we work. We're looking at monkeys and animals and saying like, okay, so this is what beings with brains can do. And this is how brains are made of in neurobiology. Then we start so creating theories, and we try to understand by breaking it apart. How do we do it? On one hand, you can try to recreate what the flesh does. And that's what computational neuroscience is concerned with. It tries to reproduce biological phenomena at the level of flesh, primarily. So that is, how does a neuron work? When a neuron produces an action potential, what just happened physically in the cell? Let's simulate it. Let's try to find out when the ions may be crossing like back and forth. Let's simulate this crossing of ions. So it looks into simulations. And here, this is my first key word, no? And so we have neural models, single neural models, network models, but that relate primarily to biology itself. And then we can measure some sorts of components of these. We can measure the brain and quantify activity of the brain. And for that, we need some math, statistics, math tools. And so here, the words, the keywords are statistics and neural coding. So how many bits has an image of information? Looking into dynamical systems implementation, the physics of the neuron, like really mathematically knowing what are attractors. And so these are high-level abstract concepts that help us understand what the activity of real neurons are. So basically, we look into biology, we find out what has to be done, we take some physics, and we simulate it, and we look into the math, see what does it do. So there's neurodynamics. Or we quantify the activity of brains. We quantify local field potentials. We quantify the activity of certain areas. We quantify the firing rate of neurons. And finally, if we want to reproduce brain function, so this is a mind map, it's all in the planisphere. There's no strict hierarchy here. There's 5 different branches, so there's no orderly sequence where these have to be presented. There's 5 different components that all sum together. Neural computation is the idea we're going to be reproducing some brain function. So primarily here, I put artificial neural networks as the ones that actually try to do what brains do. So they try to learn. They try to learn with supervision. They try to make decisions. Do I have here decision making? So there should be a decision making here together with artificial learning. So supervised learning often is related to, you know, what would you prefer to do given two options. And so here is the one that is more concerned with machine learning, cognitive computing, and artificial intelligence. So you see that I put computational neuroscience and neural computation in two diametrically opposite ends of this spectrum. And the reason why, for this is precisely they are trying to cover different parts of this space. We're going to be going a little bit more into detail on that in a moment. So this is the mind map of the computing brain. This is a simple mind map. I will make it available in PDF form for you to look into it in detail, you know, as soon as we finish. All right. So here, the next question is, what is a good model? Let me see if I can see still the chat. Can I actually have here an easy way to poll you? Because I was wondering if you want to have a break now, because now we've been talking for half an hour and we could have a break. So write break in the chat if you want a break, and we will count it. If it's more than 10, say, we get a break. Else we just continue. So no break for one. How about you? How about the others? You're all having coffee, right? Actually, I forgot all about my coffee. So I'll give you a second to answer that question. Fantastic. So that I think that your message is clear. We carry on. I had here now discussing what is a model. So hopefully this is going to work out of the bat. Would you kindly come to this site, www.menti.com, and use the code 563495. You will have to use multiple windows at the same time in your PC. I hope that that's okay. So the code is down there. Can you see? So it is 563495. And would you please contribute your thought to this question? Can we understand the brain? Oh, yeah. All right. This is how we cluster, gents and ladies. So we're about 30 of us. Cool. Very cool. So this is just glorious. Symmetry and equilibrium. Wow. I'm impressed. I mean, this is usually a very balanced poll. I've applied a poll before. Usually, yeses and nos are really fighting hard against each other, but this is a pretty good, pretty straight in the middle. And I guess what the reason for this is that it really depends on what you mean when we say, can we understand the brain? So I ask you this further question. Really, but really, can we understand the brain? Really? What does it mean to understand the brain? Right? So no, but yes, but, right? So the important thing here is that we have to first understand what we mean by understand, right? So to what degree would you need to know about the brain until you're convinced that you understand the brain? There are certain levels in which we are able to understand the brain. For example, we are able to use what is called folk psychology to predict what other people are going to do. So we actually understand the brains in as much as we know what brains will do in the world. You put a brain in the world, and that's a person, and you look at the person, you learn about their patterns, and then you say, okay, we can explain that person. So this is actually a level of understanding the brain. But what we mostly are interested in here, and then you see that the proportions change with no but and yes but. Now yes but, some people that were no's before became yes buts, is because they understand that what is able to, what we're able to capture with caveats is a subset of the entire mystery of existence. So there is a little bit of, what's consciousness, and we were not talking about what's consciousness, by the way. We're talking about what brains do. So whether we're able to atomize the brain into components and then figure out what it does. If you say a categorical no, then my next question is, what brings you here? So these questions have also been answered somewhat in the SurveyMonkey, but I would like now for us to discuss it once again. Now that you got the intro, but you contribute your thought about what brings you here. So both if you think that you can explain the brain, or if you think you cannot explain the brain, please contribute what you believe brings you to do this particular elective. You had other choices. I know that the brain is cool, so you can, what brings you here? Brain is cool. I love brain. Yeah, me too. I love brains. Yeah, brains are cool. Yeah, curiosity. Yeah, that's a fundamental. Starts everything starts. It's the pyramid, the mystery. Wow, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah, so we have a little bit of more pragmatic take here. I'm interested by machine learning, so also modeling of neurons. This is potentially also a no in the original question. We're here to see how close we are. Yes, yes, and we have gone so far. It's really crazy what we've done in the last 100 years. That's why the question just before, can we understand brains? 20 years ago, like it would be an 80%, 90% no. We're 50-50 because we find more things all the time, and yet there are problems. So we have someone that's interested in machine learning primarily, and I don't know if this course is going to satisfy you. So please, later on, let me know whether you think that it complemented your idea. But it's definitely not a machine learning course. I like to learn more about the brain, correlations between brain and behavior. In fact, for the correlations between brain and behavior, here, the better course that you can take is systems and neurobiology that is going to come next. And that one is going to really discuss much more in detail correlation of brain behavior. And if I can just add something about the systems neurobiology primer. In there, the reason why we start with primary neural networks and then we go to systems neurobiology is because I think that having a mechanistic mindset of how models work projects neatly into our current understanding of neuroscience. So it is surprising to the degree to which our models reflect certain underpinnings of the brain, even despite all of the complexity and everything that is missing. And so let's see, I'd like to learn more about the networks of the brain. So the networks of the brains are, again, systems neurobiology, connecting brain to computer, brain-computer interfaces, also something we're going to discuss actually more in the computing brain even. But we will have a couple of elements to that. The brain is the most interesting thing on Earth. Wow, that's a superlative. Understanding how patterns in the brain evolve. Also interesting. So this is more of a pattern view, understanding of brain function. Very fundamental nowadays. Thinking about patterns is underlying a lot of brain. Yeah, and so there is a careful statement here, which I appreciate. We can't know everything. I guess that's a fair thing to say, but we can certainly try until a certain level of abstraction. And this is particularly what we're going to be focusing here as well. What is the level of abstraction until we understand a certain question we have? So if we want to know how we decide or how we connect bananas with the color yellow, we can have some models that don't need atoms and quantum behavior to explain. So up to a certain level of abstraction, we can encapsulate certain behaviors. So absolutely proper. So it's not like models are going to magically resolve everything, but they are going to give. So we are humans. And when we're looking into ourselves, the only tool that we truly have to understand something is our brain. So we take it and we project it onto the phenomenon that we observe. And obviously we're subjectively contaminating everything we see according to what our eyes are saying. But what our eyes are seeing, not what our eyes are saying. So we project ourselves into the problem and we absorb what the phenomenon is, and we transform that into some sort of model in our brains for understanding. And so here, yeah. So thank you for that. And the next question that I have for us is, what is a model? And I wanted to know from you what. So, what do you think is a model? So, when we model the brain up to a certain level of abstraction, what are we trying to do? And what is maybe it's a simplified system, necessarily simplified, a simplified picture of the system. These are generally the first things that emerge. I mean, because indeed, I mean, this is what can fit in our brains most often, but not necessarily. An abstraction of a phenomenon that had explanatory or predictive power. Wow, like these are very sophisticated answers. An approximation to a system. I really appreciate teaching for nanobiologists because you already are in the forefront of how to think about this problem. It doesn't need to be mathematical, though. So a model is a representation of a system that doesn't need to be mathematical. When we talk about the behavior of a person, we say, you know that guy, he's like that. That's a model of that person, right? Or when you have a model airplane, that's a model as well. So those are capturing elements and simplified, selected, right? So a model is someone on the catwalk, that's also true. And it's a model for what, right? So it's a model for some sort of archetypical beauty that we perceive indirectly. That's also, it's a perfectly proper model, right? So these are all examples of models. We're not talking exclusively about computational models. I think that it's more important to really have a broad understanding of a model is, because each of these examples you're bringing capture an aspect of it that is fundamental. An abstracted approach of reality using the inherent characteristics of the system, or the selected, I would say. I don't know if the person that wrote this would agree with me, but I would say a model is an abstracted approach of reality using the selected characteristics of the system. The ones that we think are important for explaining property X. It's a system which is predicted to hold because of data collected in the past. Certain models are certainly like that. If you just want to reproduce a certain behavior, you had some data, actual data, I guess that you're thinking about, an Excel sheet full of numbers, you can have that kind of model as well, is one type of model. And certain models actually don't need no data. Some even, for example, data collected in the past. When Newton came up with gravity theory, he had, obviously, we all humans collect data, but we project we can project some formal theoretical structures upon the sensory data we've collected, right? So even in this system, this statement would hold. Data is essential because it is what feeds our system to try to know what has to be explained in the first place. So this question here, a model is a system which is predicted to hold, relates to knowing what has to be explained. There's the implicit assumption that there's something here to be explained. Wow, someone is a fanboy. Oh, cool. So yeah, I mean, we might. I'll place a couple of neural link videos for you guys later on brain-computer interfaces. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that he is also a model of attitudes in terms of productivity, but also a counter model in certain respects. A system that allows you to simulate reality with a certain level of abstraction. It also allows you to experiment with outcomes when parameters are changed and make predictions. So this is computational neuroscience proper. This is the computational neuroscientist model. So excellent. Appreciated your contributions. Now, my favorite question is coming now. What is a good model? Oh, someone was already there. A schematic that mimics the essential features of a system. Let's continue acquiring a couple of opinions before we continue. So what is a good model? What must a good model have? What must it be? Oh, it has to find some sort of equilibrium there. Very nice. Oh, I wouldn't know him or her if that's a person. Holds up in reality. Accurately represents reality. I hope you all agree that what is a good model depends on the question you want to answer. So the not too simple, not too complex. For what? Right? So these come together. Not too simple, not too complex. It depends on the question you want to answer. One of the things that impresses me in this study that we have is that we humans, when we devote ourselves to scientific problems, we are looking into different components every time. And me and Dymphna and Timon, we might disagree. Just imagine about what is the right level of to model, or what's the exact amount of complexity to add. And much of this has to do with the actual question that we have. Maybe Dymphna wants to know how the filopodia in the neurons are forming, and so how does the growth cone at the tip of the dendrites grow, maybe like a pseudopod. And so she needs to know what are the proteins involved in the question. The word I'm looking for is the growth. So the growth processes underlying. And so she looks into the molecules. She looks into the genes, whereas Timon looks into physics of the membranes, like what's the tension at the level of the membrane, what's the density inside and outside, what is the volume that is being created inside from the proteins. So it is a question I think can be answered and should be answered every single time. For every single model, you have to focus on what's the question you want to answer. Closest representation to reality, that's a tough one. I would say that it doesn't necessarily, the closest representation to reality is one that includes a lot of detail. Maybe atoms, maybe quanta, maybe it cannot be computed. Maybe it's not a good model because we cannot run it. So even though detail will increase accuracy, it also depends on how many people, on how many data you have previously. So what I want to discuss now is COVID models. If you're going to have the closest representation to reality, you need to know at every single individual what is the likelihood that is going to die after being infected, and what's the likelihood that it's going to spread the contagion, what the likelihood that is going to infect other people. And these are things that are dependent on every single cell of the body. They're depending even on the mood sometimes, because if you're uplifting, then maybe you have certain hormones that empower you to fight the disease in a better way. So if you try to get too close, you're certainly losing that abstraction. And we just saw that a model is a representation, it's an abstraction. So I don't want to bash on this statement, but I just wanted to emphasize that a model that forms a close representation to reality might be impossible to load with data and parameters, might be a model that we cannot fully parameterize. We can even construct it, but we cannot find the actual data that matches well. Although, of course, if you had the model of every single celled human being in our idealization, you actually might be creating a fantastic prediction. But then you also have to include how buses work, right? And how public transport and so forth, and how many people went to a certain show. So to see the contagion. Occam's razor is a great one, although sometimes you do want to add a little bit more detail to your model to see if it's still compatible with the abstraction at a higher level. I want to talk about emergence a bit. Occam's razor is, if probably you're all familiar, but just to restate, make the model as simple as possible, but Einstein would add, but not simpler, right? So I guess that Einstein correctly points out that the Occam's razor is a first approximation. And after that first approximation, you really have to do not make it simpler. And yet sometimes in computational neuroscience, even though we have a model that is relatively simple, maybe the perceptron model of a single cell learning is very simple, but sometimes we want to make it more complex and see if it's still compatible with that idea. So if we make an actual model of a pyramidal cell, and we have a model of a highly simplified neural network, a perceptron, we want to know if the real cell can act like a perceptron. So we make the complex model act like a perceptron to see if the highly complex model is still compatible. The most explanatory model is still somehow the perceptron, but you have a lot of predictions and different things that can come out of a more complex model. So it's incredibly multidimensional, this question. And every time you're thinking about what is a good model, try not to be dogmatic about it. Every model will have its own question, and depends on every day. Every day you might be considering differences about what this comes in. In fact, I have here some people that are listening to us that work with me, Roger Small and Daphne, and they will be able to speak for this complexity as well. And we would love to make this more interactive. Okay, so oh, that's cool. All right, so like obviously I had to come here to Elon Musk and a Cybertruck. Appreciated your contributions. I'll put your contributions back into also into Brightspace after this. Okay, so guess that we've covered what is a good model. Let's go back to Keynote, and now we are at. Yes. So we are at the point where I prepared the break. So how about now? So does it work? Should we give it a little bit of a break? So please speak your mind. Excellent. So since Zoom has removed the limit here, I'd say we just stay inside. And 15 minutes is the 15 minutes, I'd say. So what time exactly is it now? So 10:10. So at 10:25, we reconvene. Thank you. So I'll see you shortly. I'll cut my video, but I'll keep the Zoom meeting on. Okay. So hope that you don't all run out of data. Talk to you soon.